The morning rush at Lou's Diner was always predictable. Business people hurrying through their breakfasts, construction workers grabbing coffee to go, and students cramming for exams over endless refills. But on this particular Tuesday in October, Sarah Matthews noticed something different. He walked in precisely at 7:15 a.m., when the morning chaos was just beginning to settle. Despite his weathered appearance and well-worn coat, there was something remarkable about his presence. His posture remained perfectly straight, his steps measured and deliberate, as though he were entering a grand ballroom rather than a modest downtown diner. Sarah watched as he carefully selected a small table by the window, removing his tattered hat with the grace of a gentleman. She'd seen many customers come and go during her 3 years at Lou's, but something about this man caught her attention in a way she couldn't explain. "Table 6 needs their check," barked Mike, the morning shift manager, snapping Sarah from her observations. She quickly distributed bills and cleared tables, but her eyes kept drifting back to the mysterious customer. When the rush finally subsided, Sarah approached his table. Up close, she noticed his hands, long, elegant fingers that seemed better suited for playing piano than clutching the worn paper cup before him. His eyes were clear and intelligent, carrying a depth that spoke of countless stories untold. "Can I get you anything else besides coffee?" she asked, noting how he had been nursing the same cup for nearly an hour. He looked up, offering a gentle smile that transformed his entire face. "No thank you, young lady. This is perfect." His voice carried the rich, smooth tones of someone who had once commanded attention in a very different setting. Sarah watched as he reached into his pocket, carefully counting out coins. The deliberate way he handled each penny reminded her of her late father, who'd taught her that dignity wasn't about what you had, but how you carried yourself through life's challenges. Over the next few weeks, he became a regular fixture at Lou's, always arriving at 7:15, always ordering just coffee, always counting exact change with meticulous care. While other staff members grumbled about the homeless man taking up space, Sarah noticed how he would quietly straighten his table before leaving, how he never failed to thank the staff, and how he seemed to radiate a peculiar kind of peace, despite his circumstances. Some mornings, she caught glimpses of him through the window before opening, straightening his collar in the reflection of the diner's windows. Other times, she overheard him humming classical melodies, not the usual street corner tunes, but complex pieces that seemed to flow from some deep musical memory. Sarah began keeping track of his visits in her order pad. Tuesday through Sunday, 7:15 a.m. sharp. Mondays were his only absence, and she found herself wondering where he spent those days. There was something about him that didn't fit the usual patterns of their homeless customers, a mystery that tugged at her curiosity like an unfinished melody. Little did Sarah know that her simple observations would soon unravel a story more extraordinary than anything she could have imagined, beginning with a single act of kindness on the coldest morning Chicago had seen in years. December arrived with a vengeance in Chicago, bringing bitter winds that cut through the warmest coats. Sarah pulled her scarf tighter as she approached Lou's Diner at 5:30 a.m., an hour before opening. The streetlights cast long shadows on the fresh snow, and her breath formed small clouds in the freezing air. As she rounded the corner, she spotted a familiar figure huddled in the doorway of the diner. James sat with his coat pulled tight, trying to find shelter from the wind. Even in this desperate moment, he maintained that dignity she'd come to recognize, back straight, hands folded neatly in his lap. Sarah's heart tightened. The temperature had dropped to single digits overnight, and the weather report warned of the coldest day in recent history. Without hesitation, she quickened her pace. "Good morning," she called out, fumbling with the diner keys. "You must be freezing. Please come inside." James looked up, surprise flickering across his face. "I don't want to cause any trouble. Opening time isn't for another hour." "The only trouble would be leaving you out here to freeze," Sarah replied, pushing open the door and gesturing him inside. The warmth of the diner embraced them both as they entered. Sarah flipped on the lights and headed straight to the kitchen. "I need to prep for opening anyway. You can keep me company while I work." She turned on the grill and coffee maker, their familiar hum filling the quiet space. As the coffee began to brew, she noticed James rubbing his hands together, trying to restore feeling in his fingers. Without a word, she prepared a cup of hot coffee and placed it before him. Then, breaking from her usual morning routine, she began gathering ingredients: eggs, bacon, pancake batter. "Oh no, I couldn't," James protested when he realized what she was doing. "The coffee is more than enough." Sarah cracked eggs into a bowl, her movements swift and practiced. "My father always said that food tastes better when shared with others. He'd owned a small restaurant in Memphis for 30 years. Taught me everything I know about cooking and about people." As she worked, she told James about her father's restaurant, how he would feed anyone who came in hungry, regardless of their ability to pay. He believed that sometimes people need more than just food. They need to know that someone sees them, really sees them. The aroma of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon filled the diner. When Sarah placed the full breakfast before James, golden pancakes, perfectly scrambled eggs, crispy bacon, and hash browns, his eyes welled with tears. "Why?" he asked softly, his voice catching. "Why would you do this for me?" Sarah remembered all the times she'd watched him carefully count coins for his coffee, maintaining his dignity despite his circumstances. "Because kindness matters," she replied simply, "and because everyone deserves to be treated with respect." As James took his first bite, Sarah noticed his hands. They moved with an artist's grace, handling the utensils as if they were delicate instruments. There was a story there, she was certain, but for now, she was content to watch as warmth and comfort replaced the morning's chill in his eyes. The early morning conversations between Sarah and James became a cherished ritual. Each day brought new revelations, like pieces of a puzzle slowly coming together. It started with jazz, a subject that transformed James's entire demeanor when mentioned. "I was there the night Miles Davis played at the Blue Room," James said one morning, his eyes distant with memory. 1962, middle of summer. The air conditioning had broken down, but nobody cared. We were all too mesmerized by the music. Sarah noticed how his fingers moved as he spoke, dancing across the table's surface as if playing invisible keys. "You are a musician?" she asked, pouring him a fresh cup of coffee. James's smile held a hint of something deeper, pride mixed with what might have been regret. "Music was my life. Still is in here." He tapped his chest gently. "I played piano in clubs all over, New Orleans, Chicago, New York. Those were different times. The music scene was changing, and we were part of that change." He described the smoky jazz clubs of the 1960s with such vivid detail that Sarah could almost hear the saxophone wailing and the piano keys dancing. His stories painted pictures of late-night jam sessions, legendary performers, and moments when the music transcended everything else. "There was this night in New Orleans," he continued, warming to his subject. "I was playing at the Maple Leaf Bar. Just a regular Tuesday, nothing special. But something magical happened, one of those moments when every musician on stage connects perfectly. We played until sunrise, and the audience stayed with us every minute." Sarah found herself lingering at his table whenever possible, drawn in by tales of a world she'd only seen in old photographs. But she also noticed what James didn't say, the careful way he avoided mentioning anything too personal, how he never spoke of family, or what had brought him to his current circumstances. Sometimes, in quiet moments, she would catch him staring out the window, his expression distant and thoughtful. His hands would move unconsciously, playing silent melodies on the tabletop. The other waitresses had stopped complaining about his presence, won over by his unfailing courtesy and gentle manner. One morning, as Sarah refilled his coffee, she heard him humming, not the blues or jazz she might have expected, but something that sounded like classical music. The melody was complex, beautiful, and somehow familiar. "That's beautiful," she said. "Back." James looked startled, as if caught in a private moment. "No," he replied softly. "It's something I wrote, a long time ago." His voice trailed off, and for a moment, Sarah glimpsed a deep sadness in his eyes. The morning rush swept Sarah away before she could ask more, but that brief exchange added another layer to the mystery of James. A homeless man who played jazz, wrote classical music, and carried himself like a professor, nothing about him fit the expected pattern. Sarah began paying closer attention to the music James hummed while lost in thought. Each day brought a different piece, sometimes jazz standards, other times what seemed to be original compositions. His repertoire appeared endless, spanning genres she hadn't expected. "That piece you were humming yesterday," Sarah mentioned one quiet morning, It reminded me of something I heard at a concert once. The Chicago Symphony Orchestra, I think. James's hands froze mid-gesture, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. You attend symphony concerts? He asked, his voice carrying a note of surprise and perhaps something else, pride or possibly pain. My mother used to take me, Sarah explained, sliding into the seat across from him during her break. She loved classical music, said it helped heal the soul. She paused, watching his reaction carefully. The piece you were humming, it was yours, wasn't it? James studied his coffee cup intently. Music has a way of staying with you, he said finally. Even when everything else is gone, the melodies remain. His fingers traced invisible patterns on the table's surface, and Sarah realized he was following a musical score only he could see. I had students once, he continued unexpectedly, his voice soft but clear. Taught them more than just notes on a page. Music is about emotion, about life itself. Each piece tells a story. He looked up at Sarah, his eyes bright with unshed tears. Sometimes I wonder if any of them remember. The diner's bell chimed as new customers entered, breaking the moment. Sarah stood, straightening her apron, but James's words stayed with her. The mention of students was new. Another piece of the puzzle that was James's past. Throughout her shift, Sarah watched as James absently conducted an invisible orchestra, his movements precise and graceful despite his worn clothing. He wasn't just someone who had played music, he had lived it, breathed it, taught it. At closing time, as James prepared to leave, Sarah heard him humming again. This time, it was a lullaby, but with complex harmonies that transformed the simple melody into something profound. She realized that every note he shared was a small window into his soul, a glimpse of the man he used to be, and perhaps still was, beneath the layers of hardship and time. The hospital corridor buzzed with activity, but Sarah barely noticed as she sat in the waiting room, staring at the one photograph in her hands. The young man in military dress uniform stood proudly beside a grand piano, his smile bright and confident. The back of the photo bore a simple inscription, First Performance at Juilliard, 1972. Sarah's fingers flew across her phone's keyboard, searching for any mention of James Richardson at Juilliard. The results made her breath catch. Article after article appeared. Reviews of classical performances, jazz concerts, academic achievements. One headline from 1975 declared, Rising star James Richardson appointed youngest professor at Juilliard. A grainy video from 1980 showed a younger James performing with jazz legends, his fingers dancing across piano keys with the same grace she'd noticed in his hands at the diner. The comment section was filled with former students sharing memories. Professor Richardson changed my life. His teaching went beyond music. He taught us about life itself. The nurse interrupted her research. Ms. Matthews, he's stable now. The doctor would like to speak with you. Dr. Chen, a young resident, consulted his charts. Mr. Richardson is suffering from severe pneumonia, but we've started him on antibiotics. You did the right thing bringing him in when you did. He hesitated. However, we've discovered some other concerns. His heart shows signs of previous stress, and his overall health has been neglected for years. Sarah shared her discoveries with the doctor, watching his eyes widen. James Richardson? The composer? He shook his head in disbelief. I played one of his pieces in my college recital. He was legendary in the music world until... He trailed off, quickly pulling up more records on his tablet. The story emerged piece by piece. James Richardson's career had soared through the 1970s and 80s. He'd composed symphonies, taught countless students, and bridged the worlds of classical and jazz music. Then in 2009, his wife Elizabeth, a renowned violinist, died suddenly from a heart attack during a performance. Sarah found an article from 2010, Prestigious music professor takes leave of absence. It was the last public mention of James Richardson. The article mentioned his daughter, Dr. Michelle Richardson, a rising surgical resident at the time. Sarah's hands trembled as she dialed the number for Boston General Hospital. After several transfers and long holds, a crisp voice answered. Dr. Richardson's office. Please, Sarah said, her voice urgent. I need to speak with Dr. Richardson about her father. I found him. The silence on the other end lasted several heartbeats. Then, in a voice thick with emotion, Dr. Michelle Richardson spoke. You found my father? After all these years, where is he? Looking through the hospital room window at James's sleeping form, Sarah replied softly, He's safe now. And he needs you. Dr. Michelle Richardson arrived at Chicago General Hospital exactly 3 hours after Sarah's call, still wearing her surgical scrubs beneath her winter coat. Her steps echoed through the corridor as Sarah met her at the elevator, recognizing her immediately from the medical journal photos. He's sleeping now, Sarah explained softly, leading the way. The nurses say he's been peaceful since they started the antibiotics. Michelle stopped at the doorway, a hand gripping the frame. Through the window, she studied her father's sleeping form. Thinner than she remembered, his hand now completely white, but unmistakably the man who had taught her to play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star on their grand piano 30 years ago. I searched everywhere, Michelle whispered, her professional composure cracking. Hired private investigators, contacted every music school and jazz club in the country. How did he end up here? Sarah shared the morning routine she'd witnessed at the diner, his dignity, his musicality, the way his fingers still danced across surfaces as if playing invisible keys. Michelle listened intently, tears streaming silently down her face. From her bag, Michelle pulled out her phone and opened a music app. The sound of a piano filled the room, a recording of James playing one of his own compositions, a piece he'd written for Michelle's medical school graduation. James's eyes fluttered open at the familiar melody. For a moment, he stared at the ceiling, confusion crossing his face. Then his gaze found Michelle, and time seemed to stop. Misha, he whispered, using his daughter's childhood nickname. His hands trembled as he reached toward her. Michelle crossed the room in 3 steps, gathering her father's frail form in her arms. Daddy, she sobbed, all pretense of professional distance forgotten. Why did you leave? Why didn't you let me help you? James stroked his daughter's hair, his own tears falling freely. After your mother, the music died, everything died. I couldn't bear to drag you into my darkness. We could have faced it together, Michelle said fiercely. Mom's death broke my heart too. I needed you. Sarah quietly stepped outside, giving them privacy, but through the door she heard James's voice, stronger now. I hear the music again, Misha. Sitting in that diner, watching kindness in action, the melodies started coming back. A few minutes later, Michelle stepped out, her eyes red but her smile genuine. Thank you, she said to Sarah, for seeing my father when the rest of the world looked away. Spring arrived in Chicago, bringing with it new beginnings. James sat at the piano in Michelle's downtown apartment, his fingers growing stronger each day as they danced across the keys. The therapy sessions had helped him process his grief, but it was the return to music that truly began to heal his soul. Michelle had taken a temporary position at Chicago General to be near her father, transforming her spare bedroom into a music room complete with a baby grand piano. The neighbors often paused in the hallway, listening to the beautiful melodies that flowed from apartment 1407. Sarah visited every Sunday, bringing coffee and pastries from Lou's Diner. She marveled at the transformation in James, his silver hair now neatly trimmed, his posture straight and proud, his eyes bright with purpose. Yet he maintained the same gentle humility that had first caught her attention. Music is returning to me in waves, James explained one Sunday morning, his hands resting lightly on the piano keys. Like old friends coming home. He began to play, and Sarah recognized it as the piece he used to hum while sitting at his corner table. The local community center had offered James a position teaching music to underprivileged children. Twice a week, he would sit patiently with young students, his kind voice guiding their uncertain fingers across the keys. Music lives in everyone, he would tell them. We just have to give it room to grow. One of his students, a 10-year-old named Marcus, showed particular promise. He reminds me of myself at that age, James told Sarah, his eyes twinkling. All that raw talent, just waiting for someone to believe in it. The therapy sessions with Dr. Thompson helped James understand his response to Elizabeth's death. I thought I was protecting Michelle by leaving, he admitted during a family session. Instead, I was running from my own pain, from the silence that fell when the music stopped. Michelle had found a way to blend her medical career with her father's musical legacy, organizing monthly concerts at the hospital where she worked. Patients in long-term care would be wheeled into the sunlit atrium to listen as James played healing melodies on the donated piano. Sarah watched this transformation with joy, occasionally catching glimpses of James through the diner window as he walked to his teaching sessions, his shoulders straight, his step purposeful. The lost professor had found his way home, not to the prestigious halls of Juilliard, but to a place where his music could touch lives in an entirely new way. 1 year after that fateful cold morning, Lou's diner buzzed with unusual energy. The regular morning customers mixed with well-dressed newcomers, all gathering for a special announcement. Sarah moved between tables, pouring coffee and sharing warm smiles with familiar faces. At precisely 7:15 a.m., his old arrival time, James Richardson walked through the door. Gone was the weathered coat, replaced by a tailored suit that spoke of renewed dignity. Michelle walked beside him, beaming with pride, while several of his young music students trailed behind, clutching their sheet music. The diner's owner, Lou Martinez, had cleared a space near the window, James's old spot, where a small piano now stood. As James settled onto the bench, his fingers found the keys with practiced ease, and the first notes of an original composition filled the air. "I wrote this piece here," James announced to the gathered crowd, sitting at that corner table, drinking coffee served with kindness. "I called it Sarah's Grace." The melody flowed through the diner, gentle yet powerful, like the first light of dawn breaking through darkness. When the last note faded, James stood and addressed the crowd. "A year ago, I was a man who had lost his way. I had forgotten that music isn't just about perfect performances in grand concert halls. It's about touching hearts, healing souls, and building connections." He gestured to Sarah, who blushed at the sudden attention. "This young woman didn't just serve me coffee. She served me dignity, respect, and hope. Today, I'm honored to announce the establishment of the Sarah Matthews Educational Foundation." Michelle stepped forward, unfolding an official document. "The foundation will provide full scholarships to service industry workers pursuing education in any field. Whether it's music, medicine, or business, we believe in nurturing dreams, just as Sarah nurtured hope in my father." The first scholarship had already been awarded to Mike, the morning shift manager who had once grumbled about James's presence. He was now enrolled in business classes at the local community college, working toward his degree in restaurant management. Lou Martinez took the microphone next, announcing that the diner would host monthly jazz nights, with James as the featured performer. "Music and good food feed the soul," he declared, his voice thick with emotion. "From now on, we're serving both." The young students James taught at the community center performed a simple piece they had learned, their faces shining with concentration and pride. James watched them with tears in his eyes, seeing in each child the power of music to transform lives. As the celebration continued, Sarah found a quiet moment with James at his old table. "You've changed so many lives," she said softly. James smiled, the same gentle smile she'd first noticed a year ago. "Every great symphony starts with a single note," he replied. "You played that note, Sarah. You reminded me that sometimes the greatest music comes from the simplest acts of kindness." The diner filled with conversation, laughter, and music, a perfect harmony of past and present, struggle and triumph, loss and recovery. Outside, the morning sun painted Chicago's skyline in shades of gold, while inside Lou's diner, Grace continued its endless song.